Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're looking at a game between Alexei Potapov with the white pieces and Grandmaster Alexander Morozevich with the black pieces. Now this game took place in the Russian Rapid Championships in 2019, so we're going to get right into it. D4 by Potapov, D5 by Morozevich, C4, and knight c6. We have the rare, at least at the elite levels, Chigorin's defense here. Now, I want to say that Morozevich is the strongest grandmaster ever to regularly employ the Chigorin's defense. Other grandmasters have played it, and there are other GMs who regularly employ it. But Morozevich was number 2 in the world in 2008. That was his peak. He was about 2788, I believe, at the time. And he was regularly playing Chigorin's defense, and also he would employ Albin counter gambit. I'll post the links at the end of the video, but I've made 2 compilation videos, huge videos, long videos rather. One called the Albin counter gambit according to Alexander Morozevich, and the other is the Chigorin's defense according to Alexander Morozevich. Also, I just want to mention there's the lady that you can see up above next to Morozevich. Again, whoever the first one is to tell me who she is, I'll be sure to shout you out in my next video. So every video that I do, I'm gonna post a different chess player next to the main players in the game, just for fun, to spice things up a bit. If you know who that is, you know your chess players, that's good. Let me know in the comments below there. So let's talk about Chigorin's defense. And this is why I picked this game. It's a defense you don't see too often. First, let's look at the demerits, or the reasons why it wasn't really popular at the elite levels. One, it doesn't quite follow the classical school of thought in chess. So the reason why Chigorin's defense was really not liked too much is, one, black fails to maintain a pawn in the center. With the pawn on d4 being attacked by c4, black normally would play Queen's Gambit decline, especially near the turn of the century, right, where the turn, in the early 1900s, where teachings of Steinitz, players like Tarish, their theory and teachings were dominant. And so by playing knight c6, black is not supporting his center with, say, e6, right, and wanting to maintain a pawn in the center. And the idea is that, hey, white can just simply take on d5, and now the queen is exposed, and right, you have the queen coming out early, violating more principles, etc., etc. So that was one reason. The second reason why Chigorin's defense was frowned upon was that the knight on c6 is blocking the c7 pawn, which again hinders black's counter action in the center. So if he needs to play a move like c6 to support the d5 point, he can't do it. If he wants to play c5, right, to counterattack in the center, he can't do it. All right. The third strike against the Chigorin's defense was that black often will trade his bishops for knights early on in the game. And for the classical ideology, that was just absolute no-no. So those were the 3 strikes against the opening. Now, okay, what was it about this opening that attracted Chigorin, right? Chigorin, was the father of the Russian chess school, and highly revered. And if you read Morozevich's book, he loves Chigorin, and Chigorin did not really appreciate the classical chess school, and he didn't like the Queen's Gambit. He didn't like the slow moving positions, and so Chigorin wanted to play very actively. And this opening, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, Chigorin's defense is all about piece play and activity. If you look at the position, Black has already assumed the lead in development, right? Just immediately. Okay, so there's some demerits there, but what Black is going to get in return is easy and fast development. And with this fast development, his modus operandi, so to speak, right? His MO is going to be activity, activity, activity. All right? Because in the long run, these positional concessions that Black has made, for instance, allowing White to have more preponderance of pawns in the center, etc., having the two bishops as the game goes on, the advantages will tend to be in White's favor in the long term. So Black wants to use his early activity and in the middle game, right, to put so much pressure on White that White makes concessions or, of course, mistakes, but realistically positional concessions whereby Black can capitalize and equalize based off of his dynamic play. All right, so you're really talking about dynamism versus positional and static advantages here. So just remember, if you're playing Chigorins, you're playing for activity. All right, you're not getting that lead in development for nothing. Let's go on with the game. Potapov plays knight f3 here. A few moves can be played. Of course, knight c3. C takes d5 can be played, of course. And this is what I'm talking about with the early piece play. Notice here Black has to capture with this queen, right, as he is chosen not to play the move e6. But notice that right away Black is already threatening to capture the d pawn. Therefore, White is not able to exploit the placement of the queen at this point. So knight f3, and now Black will play a move like e5, again putting more pressure on d4 and unleashing the bishop. So now knight c3, bishop b4. One thing to know again about this opening is when you bring your queen out to d4 in this particular line, you want to keep it there at all costs. You don't want to get driven away early by the knight. So you're willing to give up the bishop pair for the knight. All right. In return, White is going to get a strong center. But again, you have to be active with the pieces, as you can see here in this particular line. Now, c takes d5 is more direct than knight f3 as played in the game. But knight f3, although it's a little bit slower, it definitely packs a punch. So after knight f3, Black played the move bishop g4. Why bishop g4 here? Well, if you understand the opening and what White is trying to do, you'll see that in this line, c takes d5, queen takes d5, the d pawn is under attack here. And then now White defends with knight f3. So what White does here in the knight f3 line is he kind of does a little bit of prophylaxis here. He defends the d4 pawn ahead of time, and now he's threatening the same thing. Now White wants to play c takes d5. So I'll show you White's plan. Let's imagine White has an extra move here. So this is what White wants to do now. C takes d5. Now notice that after queen takes d5, the d pawn is protected. Okay, the knight is out, and now he can play knight c3 without having to worry about the pawn being taken. And let's say queen d6, for example, and e4. This is exactly what white dreams of playing d4. I'm sorry, d4, knight f3. Okay, this is why bishop g4 is played. Let's go back here. Other moves are inadequate here. For example, if d takes c4 here, just simply d5. And again, with the knight on f3, black's knight is forced away from the center, right? If he does knight a5, he's practically lost here. After queen a4, c6, bishop d2. This forces him to b8. Again, e4. This is terrible for black. If he tries a natural looking knight f6, again, remember what we said earlier about not having maintaining the pawn on d5. So say knight f6, simply c takes d5, and let's say knight takes d5, e4, knight f6, and here you have like a bad version of a Grunfeld here, right? There's no knight on c3 to exchange. And then again, you can just knock the knight out of the center. Great position for white. If he takes with the queen, again, with the d4 pawn being protected, knight c3, queen a5, and you just knock white around. Bishop d2. Let's say queen b4, tries to get slick there. Just e4, and here black is almost lost. You can analyze this yourself. Okay, but just giving you the understanding behind the moves. So bishop g4 is there. Why? So now you can understand the reason for bishop g4. Bishop g4 is there not only to get the bishop outside of the pawn chain, because black does want to play e6. It threatens the removal of the knight. All right, so now white's idea is challenged. Now he's not going to just be able to play c takes d5. In the game, knight c3 is played. However, if c takes d5 is played, and sometimes you see some weaker players or players that are not prepared against the Chigorins play like this, c takes d5, now black just simply plays bishop takes f3, g takes f3, and then queen d5, and now you're kind of back at square one. You see? And then, of course, knight c3 can't be played because the d4 pawn is under attack, so you got to play e3, and then black is prepared to play moves like e6 or e5. Bishop come on his way to b4. So in the game, knight c3, e6, e3, just simply strengthening the d pawn. And again, every move has its reason. If white tries to go on excursion and play a move like queen b3, for example, with the idea of capturing on d5 a few times and attacking b7 simultaneously, then just simply bishop takes f3, e takes f3, again removing the protector of d4, knight takes d4. So you can see the power of the piece play in the Chigorin. Another idea, again, c takes d5, and queen b3. You can see b7 and queen b3 attacked at the same time. Knight f6, but you can see the development from black. Let's say, for example, illustrative purposes, queen takes b7, knight b7. Again, the piece is swarming, and that's what I want you to see. All right, and I'll leave this side variation right there, but I just want you to get an idea of the spirit of play with black. Okay, your pieces have to be in harmony and just swarming and ready to fight. So if you're not the type of player who enjoys like imbalanced and sometimes murky and wild positions, don't play the Chigorin. back to the game. So e3, strengthening the d4 pawn. Bishop b4. Bishop d2. Knight f6. Again, why did I highlight white's 2 bishops? Is because I just wanted to illustrate the difference between white's bishops and black's bishops. Notice the contrast. Notice how all of black's minor pieces are free and out. Okay, black has certainly equalized here at this point. All right. h3. And Morozevich goes for bishop h5. Bishop f5 is good too because it prohibits the bishop, the white bishop that is on f1, from coming to d3. So bishop f5 is definitely a good move. However, Morozevich decides to keep the tension and the pressure on the knight on f3. So white goes with c takes d5. Of course, he could have played bishop d3 there. He plays c takes d5, e takes d5, and now bishop b5. So this is white's idea in the position is to double the pawns on the c file and attack the weaknesses accordingly. So he clarifies the position somewhat and gives himself a clear target, and plays queen a4 here, right? Black has those weak looking pawns, open c file to attack, and he's also attacking the bishop on b4 at the same time. Again, this is where black's dynamism comes into play. He has to be ready to play actively. All right. Now, the thing about attacking pawns is usually you want them to be fixed first. All right. And here, Morozevich just simply plays c5, right? And he protects the bishop, and also he puts pressure on the center on d4. Now, let me back up here, because another move that I had thought of during my analysis was, instead of queen a4, because after all, I said if queen a4 and c5 is possible, then maybe queen a4 isn't that good. So I looked at knight a4, which in my mind, one idea is, of course, if bishop takes d2, then queen d2, and followed by rook to c1, with this pressure on the c file, and of course the knight would just be sitting pretty on c5. Okay, but after knight a4, of course, black should not take should not exchange bishops. His bishop is better. First of all, if you look at the pawn structure, the bishop on d2 is a quote-unquote bad bishop, right? It's not too good. Meanwhile, white's dark square bishop is good. So strategically, it's good not to trade here, right? So bishop d6, let's say rook c1, and now knight e4. Again, don't worry about the pawn. Rook takes c6. It's activity, activity, activity. f5, and now, right, black is building up for that kingside attack in this sample variation. You can see the idea being bishop takes f3 here, queen takes, and then the knight will attack on d2. So for example, again, just giving a couple of moves away. I'm sorry, for example, if castle, bishop takes f3, g takes f3, because the queen can't capture on f3 because the knight will capture the bishop on d2. So g takes f3 and queen g5 check. Again, that's pretty much winning, right? You could put that in the bag. Again, activity, activity, activity. So in the game, queen a4 was played. Let me just say, also possible for white is just a castle here. Castle, and again, bishop d6 with the same idea. And g4, bishop g6. Eventually, because of the pressure black is putting on white is eventually going to have to play g4. And I think this is one of the reasons why Potapov did not castle, because he didn't want to have to deal with the king side getting ripped open at this point, or castling and then having to play a weakening move like g4. So queen a4, c5, and now Potapov plays knight e5. So he kind of kills two birds with one stone. He moves the knight, so now the bishop is not hitting anything, and also he's threatening knight to c6. So now Morozevich parts with his bishop. Okay, and not only is he alleviating himself of white's threat, but he's clearing the way for the knight on f6 to come to e4 without having to worry about being captured. So bishop takes knight, bishop takes c3, and again, white's bishop is still a suspect. It's more like a glorified pawn there on c3. All right. So knight e4, and now g4. Okay. So what's the reason for g4? Again, if castles, black is going to play f6. He's going to kick the knight out, and that knight really doesn't have a place to go reasonable, but that's reasonable, but back to f3, and that's the problem. Let's look at the other choices. So knight d3 is a choice, but bishop e2, knight takes c5, bishop takes f1, losing the exchange. All right, getting a pawn, but losing the exchange. That's good for black. Black would then just play knight takes c5. Okay, is white still surviving? Yeah, but is that really what white wants to go into? The other option, knight c6. However, getting caught up in the mix, right, with these pins and so on, not sure about that. Let's say queen a6, then rook a8, with the obvious idea of just pinning the knight. And let's give black another move, and that's what it will look like there. So to avoid the pin, knight a5, let's say c takes d4, and e takes d4. Knight takes e3. Boom, bishop e2, queen and rook attacked. And it's beautiful how it's beautiful to see that when you play with your pieces fully developed and active, how things just seem to magically happen on the board. In this variation, we looked at e takes d4. If he takes with the bishop here, then just simply c5, bishop c3, and rook e6. Again, the activity of black just overwhelms the white position here. And so those two choices don't work, right? Knight d3 and knight c6. So white is stuck with going back. And so bishop takes f3, g takes f3, c takes d4, e takes d4 is forced, because if bishop takes d4, then you have knight e2 again with this fork on the rook and the pawn on f3. So e takes d4, and now knight g5 with the same idea. All right, and now king g2 can be played, but then white can black can play a move like queen c8, for example, attacking the h3 pawn along with the knight. This is why Potapov, right, these variations rather, this is why Potapov settled on g4. All right, he's like, man, I don't want to castle into all of that. So bishop g6, rook h2. Again, the pressure, the piece activity of black is a lot to deal with. And rook h2 deals with this latent idea in the position of queen h4 with the knight on e5, attacking the f2 square. Queen d7 was an idea to try to trade queens, but again, just queen h4 and then rook h2. So, okay, back to the game. So, rook h2. Morozevich plays c takes d4. And now e takes d4. Now, one thing to know, too, a nice general, of course, you know, things have to be calculated concretely sometimes. But a nice general principle to know is that usually you don't want to open up a diagonal for a bishop. So most of the time you won't want to play a move like c takes d4 when black could play bishop takes d4 and just open up the diagonal for the bishop. But this is a concrete situation where it doesn't work out for white if he takes with the bishop. So for example, c takes d4. If bishop takes d4, then c5, knight g6, f takes g6, and let's say bishop e5, for example. Then just simply knight g5, threatening to come into f3, forking the bishop on e5, the rook on h2, and the king. If he goes to bishop, if he goes to c3 with the bishop, black has a beautiful tactical shot. Knight takes f2, and what this move does is forces white's rook to enter into an unwanted pin. So queen h4, queen c2, and then rook a e8. And there's really no way to stop the threats here. Again, the key theme is just activity. Activity, activity, activity from black. You can see white's pieces, not fully developed. The rook is still on a1, and the rest of the pieces aren't coordinated. So going back to the game, c takes d4, e takes d4 was played. Again, more activity. Right, simple threat of winning the piece here after f6. Right, so the king has to take a walk. King f1. Some of you are saying, hey, I would have castled queenside in that situation. That's pretty dangerous, especially with the bishop on g6 pointing at the b1 square. So it's not like the king could just slide over to a1. Plus the b file is open. So in this particular situation, if white castles, then knight takes c3, b takes c3, queen g5, and you can see that the queen acting like a bishop right on the diagonal there. So king b2, rook a b8. Again, activity, activity, activity. King a1, but now very strong move here. And again, when your pieces are all coordinated and lined up, usually there's combinations on the board, especially if your opponent's position is weak. If you look at black's position, his pieces are not coordinated and kind of scattered about. The rook is on h2, misplaced, queen on a4, and so this combination works perfectly. The king is weak, right? So rook takes e5, d takes e5, queen takes e5, and you can see the double threat against c3 and h2, and white is going to lose that rook on h2, and of course lose the game. Again, this is why Potapov plays king f1, c5, f3, queen f6, exploiting the pin. There's Morozevich. King g2. Nice move here. Queen f4. Right, threatening to infiltrate the position with queen g3. Also very strong was just c takes d4. Again, bishop takes d4, and then knight g5. And the idea here is, again, giving up the exchange by playing rook takes. on e5 and then playing queen takes f3. So h4, rook takes, h takes, and then rook e2, king g1, and queen takes f3. So just very strong options for black at this point. Queen f4, bishop to e1, guarding that g3 square, and now rook a b8. It's active. Queen c2, and queen c2 protects the b2 pawn, but notice it steps right into the vision of that bishop on g6. So Morozevich plays knight g5, and now queen d2. If knight g6, then white runs into the problem we stated earlier, where now the f3 pawn is not protected. So that's why he has to move the queen. So he plays queen d2. He said, hey, man, let's trade these queens off. Morozevich says, all right, we're going to do it on my terms. He says, let me take this pawn first and threaten this knight on e5. So queen takes d4, c takes d4, knight g6, rook takes b2 check. And you can see this white's position falls apart. Rook d1 here, knight e6, a4, g5, a5, and a6, and Potapov resigned at this point. There's really no stopping the domination of black. This is just a sample of how possibly could have continued. Black has ideas of rook ec2, knight e2 check, and say knight c3, for example, attacking the rook and the bishop at the same time, and threatening to promote this pawn. So all of those ideas cannot be possibly stopped with white in such a compromised position with his pieces. So that is it. Morozevich with the powerful rapid game in 2019. I miss seeing him play in the elite tournaments, but I'm glad to have seen him play it in his heyday. Very, very unique personality in the chess world, and very dynamic player, a player that was always exciting to watch, and often would play these obscure openings like Chigorin's defense or Albin counter gambit, even the center game. He played that. And it's always good to see somebody very strong trying these openings, because usually you'll see the situation where it's grandmaster versus weaker player trying the opening, and then of course you don't know if it's the opening that's at fault or it's just the discrepancy in strength or rating between the players. So it's always refreshing to see Morozevich bringing out these ancient openings. So that'll do it for this video. Once again, I want to thank everybody for listening. And I also want to just ask everybody, hey, hit that thumbs up button, like, subscribe, share the video. If you have any comments, please leave them down below. Like I said, if you know who the chess player is up top, I'll be glad to shout you out in my next video. And also check the links below. I always post links, books, or DVDs related to whatever opening or subject that I am talking about. So below, find links to the book, The Chigorin's Defense, according to Alexander Morozevich, and also another book on the Chigorins from a player named Broznik. So I have both of those books. Both are very good. I like Morozevich's better because he actually has many games at the highest levels playing it, and also there's tons of actual explanation in the book, as opposed to just say computer lines or something like that. He's actually just giving you the philosophy behind the Chigorins and how you should be playing. Okay, so with that said, I also want to tell you too that chess audiobooks, right, is also my name on Light Chess, and also on chess.com. So if I'm on there and messing around, I'll be glad to play your game. All right. So with that said, enjoy the rest of your day or evening or whatever time it is, and I'll see you guys shortly on the next video. Thanks for listening. See you later.